Kash Patel, Syed Jasmine Crockett was unfit. Her response left the room, speechless. The word unfit hit the room like a thrown blade, not screamed, not barked, just spoken flat, deliberate, like a judgment already decided. And it came from Kash Patel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward. He simply stared across the congressional chamber, mic-hot cameras rolling, and let it fly. She is unfit to serve on this committee. That moment, the syllables barely cooled, cut straight through the hearing like a wire snapping under pressure. A few aides in the back straightened. One reporter dropped his pen. The buzz of Washington politics of floor gossip and procedural dullness was suddenly a live wire. This wasn't testimony anymore. It was an ambush. And Representative Jasmine Crockett. She didn't blink. She sat still, composed, not frozen. Pen in hand, blazer crisp. A single click echoed as she pressed the ballpoint down onto her yellow legal pad and calmly wrote one line. No response, no rebuttal, just breath. Just silence. And that silence wasn't hesitation. It was a loaded chamber, because while Kash Patel had just launched what he thought was a career-ending blow, what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Jasmine Crockett had been waiting for him. Not for days, for weeks. And in her briefcase tucked between annotated memos and a well-worn binder sat a small unlabeled black USB drive. He never saw it coming. The man across from her, the self-styled national security expert, the media darling of the right, had just publicly challenged the intelligence, credibility, and capacity of a woman who'd built her career on dismantling power, not with outrage, but with receipts, with facts, with patience. But let's rewind. 2 hours earlier, the Longworth building was just another bureaucratic hive buzzing with caffeine over air-conditioned and stinking faintly of printer toner and tension. Security was tight. The witness list had already leaked to press, and the morning whispers among Hill reporters all revolved around one name, Patel. He was expected to grandstand. He always did. But no one expected blood. At 9:43 a.m., Jasmine Crockett entered the hearing room alone. No entourage, no fanfare. Just her, a navy suit, and a black leather case. She took her seat at the panel like it was any other Thursday. She flipped open a notepad, clipped back her hair, and nodded once to the staffer adjusting her mic. She looked calm, not bored, not smug, calm like someone who had memorized every inch of the battlefield before the first shot was fired. The cameras went live at 10:02. The chairman gave the usual procedural intro. Then, like clockwork, Kash Patel leaned into his mic and took the first real shot of the day. I've worked with intelligence professionals for decades, he said, his voice smooth but pointed. I know what it takes to comprehend classified data and national threats. It's not a job for the inexperienced or the unprepared. It's certainly not for those more interested in performance than substance. No names, not yet, just shadows. But everyone knew the jab wasn't subtle. The crowd shifted. On C-SPAN, the chyron was dry national security oversight hearing, but the air inside the room was not. It buzzed with something electric. Then he said it. Frankly, I find it disturbing that someone with such a limited grasp of security issues has been appointed here. It compromises the seriousness of this committee. She is, in my view, unfit to serve. Click. That was the sound of Jasmine's pen. One reporter in the third row turned slowly to look at her, expecting fire. Or tears. Or at least a flinch. None came. Instead, she calmly drew a single breath. Then another. It wasn't retreat. It was loading. Because Patel's smart media seasoned, backed by donors and former White House clout, had just stepped into the exact trap he didn't know was waiting. He hadn't come with evidence. He came with tone. And Jasmine Crockett. She came with a recording. 6 weeks earlier, in a little-noticed closed-door debrief labeled simply Section 702, Expert Insights, Patel had participated in a panel. It wasn't streamed. It wasn't public. But it had been recorded for internal documentation. That day when Crockett pressed Patel with a question about domestic surveillance loopholes, he didn't insult her. He didn't dismiss her. He looked impressed. Didn't expect her to catch that he'd said. But that memo she dropped sharp. Surprising. I'll give her that. It was a moment, casual, off guard, honest, and it was captured perfectly clearly, undeniably on tape. That audio had passed from one junior policy aide named Ava Kingsley to her supervisor, then to Crockett's chief of staff, and finally, quietly into Jasmine's hand. She hadn't released it, not then. Not when Patel spent the next few weeks taking subtle shots at her on conservative media. Not even when the witness list for today's hearing leaked and his name was on it. She waited. She prepared. And now, with half the country watching live, with every journalist in the chamber scribbling furiously and with the word unfit hanging in the air like smoke, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward. Her voice didn't rise. Her hands didn't shake. She simply requested permission to play a short, classified cleared audio clip relevant to the witness's credibility. The chairman hesitated. Legal counsel whispered. The camera zoomed. Then, "You may proceed." And Jasmine. She didn't look at Patel. She didn't need to. She plugged in the drive, clicked once, and let his own voice from 6 weeks ago fill the chamber. That Crockett memo clean, well-informed, honestly sharper than I thought she was capable of. Then silence, thick, undeniable, devastating. This wasn't just a contradiction, it was a detonation. Jaws tightened, reporters froze. A few aides made eye contact across the room as if to say, did he just? Yes, he did. And Jasmine. She didn't gloat. She didn't gloat because this wasn't revenge. It was revelation. And it had only just begun. He did. And everyone knew it. The audio clip ended, but the silence didn't. It lingered sticky and palpable like humidity before a storm. Kash Patel shifted in his chair, not dramatically, just enough for the movement to be noticed. A blink too slow. A glance to the chairman, the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth, unsure whether to smirk or scowl. It was too late either way, because the room had already heard the truth, in his own voice, from his own mouth. Uncoached, unguarded, and undeniable, Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't need to. What was supposed to be her unraveling had become his unmasking. The word unfit had boomeranged back heavier, sharper, and stuck like a pin to the collar of Kash Patel's carefully tailored credibility. The chairman leaned into his microphone, voice flat but carrying authority. "Mr. Patel, would you like to respond to the apparent contradiction between your current statement and the recording just presented?" Patel opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Crockett. Still no grin, still no dominance, just quiet recalibration. A career operative realizing the battlefield had shifted and he was now outflanked. He tried. "I don't recall making that statement," he said, finally weakly eyes scanning for an out. It may have been taken out of context. The sentence dropped with the weight of a styrofoam cup. Empty, disposable, transparent. Crockett turned her chair slightly. Not to face him, never directly. She addressed the panel. "The voice is his," she said, her tone surgical. "The date and location are verified. Clearance has been confirmed. The content is unedited." Then she paused just long enough to make sure the weight landed. "Mr. Patel's evaluation of me in private directly contradicts his accusations today. This is not just a difference of opinion. It's a deliberate deception presented to this committee under oath. It wasn't a punch. It was a diagnosis." Representative Judith Beal, a moderate with a distaste for grandstanding, adjusted her glasses and leaned into her mic. "I think it's clear we have a credibility issue before us," she said, her voice cool. "We've now heard verbatim Mr. Patel endorse Representative Crockett's preparedness privately while attacking her publicly. That matters." The chairman didn't argue. Across the aisle, a few members began to shift to posture, tone, attitude. One even folded his hands like a reluctant prayer. No one rushed to defend Patel. He wasn't radioactive yet, but he was definitely warming up. In the second row behind the panel, Marcus Crockett's longtime aide and trusted strategist sat with his arms crossed, jaw clenched. Not in tension, but in restrained satisfaction. He didn't move, didn't smile, but he knew what just happened. So did Jasmine, but she didn't react. That wasn't the play. This wasn't about a gotcha moment. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about proof. The clip was never meant to destroy. It was meant to reveal. And it had done exactly that. The chair gave a slight nod. "Representative Crockett, you may proceed with your time." She didn't hesitate. Her voice was even almost quiet. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no further questions for the witness." Then she unplugged the USB, capped it, slipped it back into her folder like a well-worn tool used not flaunted, and closed the flap. Across the room, no one spoke. Reporters looked at each other, not with curiosity, but with consensus. There was nothing left to say. The story had written itself mid-air in real time. And it was devastatingly simple. Patel lied. Crockett didn't. That kind of clarity is rare in politics. And when it happens, it doesn't make a splash. It leaves a scar. When the session recessed for lunch, no one moved quickly. There was no rush to coffee, no line at the snack table, just quiet, processing. Patel stood slowly, his papers gathered, not like a confident consultant, but like a man who suddenly realized he needed to exit stage left with minimal damage. Outside the hearing room, the press swarmed. He offered nothing, no comment. At this time, he mumbled, eyes low. It wasn't shame, it was calculation. How do you spin what was just made unspinnable? Back inside, Jasmine was still seated. She didn't bolt, didn't rush for a headline. Instead, she leaned back and let the moment land. Then quietly, she was approached. Representative Thomas Wynne, a centrist Democrat, the kind who rarely aligned with her faction, stepped beside her chair. That was handled, he said. Not a compliment, a confirmation. She looked up. Handled. He nodded, professionally, with clarity. We need more of that in here. Then he walked away. No applause, no cameras. Just that. But in this town, that meant everything. Later that day, after the footage had already begun, ricocheting across platforms, snipped, stitched, shared, Crockett sat in her office sipping cold coffee and reviewing her notes from earlier in the morning. Tanya, her chief of staff, stood near the window phone, pressed to her ear. They're scrambling, she said, covering the mic. Patel's team is trying to find a way to discredit the audio, but it's already been authenticated 3 different ways. It's airtight, Jasmine exhaled, not in triumph, in release. I wasn't trying to trap him, she said. I just wanted the room to see what I've seen. Tanya smiled faintly. They saw it. Just then, a knock. Keegan, a staffer from Repeters Wind's team, peeked in. Hey, he said, tentative. Just wanted to say, that was sharp today. Really sharp. Jasmine nodded once. Thanks. He hesitated, then added, didn't think you'd go for the audio. Glad you did. Then he left. That night, the clip of the recording played on every major news network, looped with dramatic intros, voiceovers, and what just happened panels. But for Jasmine, the viral impact wasn't the goal. The truth was. And she delivered it not with anger or volume, but with poise, with evidence, with strategy. She didn't shout. She plugged in a USB and let the room do the rest. The moment Jasmine Crockett plugged in that drive, the hearing became something else, no longer a platform for bluster and posturing, but a reckoning chamber. And while the internet raced to dissect what had just unfolded, Jasmine already knew the real story didn't begin at the hearing. It began long before Kash Patel ever walked through that door. Weeks earlier, in the low-ceilinged back office of the Rayburn House office building, the plan wasn't yet a plan. It was just suspicion, a hunch, a whisper in the hallway. Jasmine Crockett sat alone at her desk, papers everywhere, one earbud in the other out. Her policy advisor, Marcus, stood in the doorway, frowning down at a schedule printed fresh off the press. They've got Patel lined up to testify, he said, voice neutral, but loaded, next month. Jasmine didn't even glance up, and they're still pretending it's a neutral hearing. Oversight review was the phrase they used, Marcus said. Neutral as a brick. She sighed. Good. Let them think I'm walking in blind. The day Patel's name hit the official witness list was the day Jasmine knew she had to play the long game. Patel was a tactician, a media-trained mouthpiece for a machine that preferred sound bites to substance. He wouldn't come in with policy arguments, he'd come with theatrics, with loaded phrases designed to trigger headlines and undermine her. But Jasmine didn't do reactive. She did research, and she remembered the moment the leverage had first come across her desk. It was 2 months ago. A USB drive, small, black, no label, handed to her chief of staff, Tanya, by a fellow staffer on the Intel committee with access to internal briefing archives. The clip wasn't bombastic. It wasn't scandalous. It was, in some ways worse, it was candid. Patel's voice unguarded, praising her memo, admitting he'd underestimated her, calling her sharper than expected. It wasn't praise so much as confession. A moment of truth spoken in private never meant for a wider audience, and that made it powerful. You want to leak it, Tanya asked the day they first heard the file. Jasmine shook her head slowly. Too early. Timing matters. Too late, and it doesn't matter at all, Marcus added from the corner. Then we wait, Jasmine said, tapping the drive between her fingers. He'll give us the moment. I'm not going to manufacture it. I'm going to let him walk into it. So she carried the clip with her. Not to trap him, but to be ready. The weeks that followed were quiet. Patel appeared on 2 right-wing podcasts, made veiled jabs on social media, called her ambitious but out of her depth in one op-ed. She never responded. She annotated legislation. She attended briefings. She prepped for a dozen other things. But always that USB drive stayed close, loaded, waiting, because the moment she chose to use it, it had to be surgical, not for revenge, for clarity. And clarity requires restraint. What Jasmine understood, and what so many underestimated, was that timing is everything in DC. Not the noise, not the speed, the precision. A month before the hearing, in one of those low-attendance classified briefings buried in the schedule, a staffer barely old enough to rent a car had made the decision that would change everything. Her name was Ava Kingsley. Fresh out of George Washington University, Ava wasn't anyone's insider. She didn't belong to a party machine. She wasn't looking for clout. She was doing what she always did, listening. That day when Patel gave his offhand remarks about Jasmine's memo, she had paused not because it was scandalous, but because it was honest. It didn't fit the narrative Patel had been pushing in public, and it deserved to be heard. She flagged the recording for her supervisor, quietly, no fanfare. Something about this feels relevant, she said. It trickled up from there, to Tanya, then to Jasmine. And the first time she listened, Jasmine didn't smile, didn't fist pump. She simply sat back in her chair, let it finish, and said, "He really thought no one would remember." She didn't plan to strike immediately. She planned to remember better than he did, because she knew how these games worked. The louder voices always assumed they'd control the narrative. Men like Patel didn't fear contradiction. They relied on it being drowned out. But Jasmine had the one thing that cut through noise like a blade, a record. So she waited. And when the hearing date came, and Patel swaggered into that chamber with a red tie and a smirk too wide, she knew the moment had arrived. Not because he insulted her, but because he lied. And in Washington, you don't always get to win arguments with emotion, but you can win with evidence. Back in her office after the hearing, Jasmine watched the viral clip without sound. She didn't need it. She remembered every second, the look on his face, the stillness in the room, the moment when every person watching realized she came prepared. Her inbox had already exploded. Dozens of emails from colleagues, messages from strangers. One note stood out from Ava Kingsley. "Heard my audio in the clip. Felt surreal. Thank you for using it with care," Jasmine replied simply. "Thank you for listening closely. That mattered more than you know." Later that night, alone with a cup of tea and the city lights cutting lines across her apartment wall, Jasmine looked at the drive again. She didn't need it anymore. The truth had already done its job, but she kept it tucked into the folder, not as a weapon, as a reminder of the power of patience, of the value of precision, and of the rare force that is a woman who doesn't flinch when the fire comes, because she brought the fire and let it speak for itself, and that would have been enough. But in Washington, when a woman like Jasmine Crockett proves her worth with such precision, silence doesn't follow. No, what comes next is far more subtle and far more dangerous. They don't attack the facts. They attack the frame. By the next morning, the backlash machine had already rebooted. Ambush tactics, improper use of classified access. She planned it all, political theater at its most dishonest. That last one was a chyron on a right-wing news network flashing beneath a B-roll loop of Jasmine plugging in the USB. No mention of the recording's verified clearance. No acknowledgement of Patel's blatant contradiction. Just noise, loud, rapid fire, intentionally disorienting. Jasmine saw it coming. She was still in her robe, coffee in hand, standing barefoot in her kitchen when the first headlines popped into her group chat. Marcus sent the screenshot. One of Patel's allies in Congress was demanding an ethics inquiry. No legal standing, no official charge, just the suggestion. And in Washington, a suggestion is often enough to stain, Tanya chimed in. Next, they're trying to make it about the method, not the lie. Jasmine didn't panic. She finished her coffee, then opened her laptop. Not to read, to write. She recorded a simple message. No makeup, no press team, no polish, just her voice. I didn't walk into that room looking for a fight. I walked in with notes, with questions, with a file folder I'd been building for weeks. But when someone calls your ability into question publicly, you either let it stand or you stand up. She paused. I stood up. Not with shouting, not with spin, with evidence. And a voice that didn't crack even when it hurt. The video was posted at 9:12 a.m. By 10 UNFIT, it was everywhere. Retweeted by progressives, reposted by teachers, shared in civic forums across the country. It wasn't just a political moment anymore. It had become something else, a template, a message, a strategy for survival in rooms designed to shrink you. And with that came something Jasmine hadn't expected. Not applause, not viral fame, but attention. Real institutional, uneasy attention. Within hours, a senior Democrat she'd only spoken to in passing called her office. He opened with something vague, impressive poise under pressure, but quickly shifted gears. "Just tread carefully, okay?" he said. "You're effective. But the spotlight can burn just as fast as it shines." It wasn't a threat, but it wasn't comfort either. Jasmine nodded even though he couldn't see her. "Thanks. But I didn't step into the fire to back away when it gets hot." She hung up. The glow of the wind was fading now, and what it left behind was the thing no one talks about when you go viral for being right. Isolation. For every message of praise, there were 3 unread emails with vague subject lines. For every handshake in the hallway, a door that now closed a little faster when she approached. She wasn't being iced out, not yet, but she felt the room recalibrating around her. Because in politics, they'll cheer you when you succeed, but they'll question you when you succeed too well. That afternoon, she received a second message from Cheryl Landon, a moderate from Michigan, who'd once openly dismissed Crockett as more flash than function. This time, the tone was different. "You stood your ground," Cheryl said. "Didn't shout, didn't posture. That goes further than you think." Jasmine took a second. "Thanks. I wasn't aiming to win anything. I just wanted to correct the record." Cheryl's reply was soft, but sharp. Sometimes correcting the record is winning. That line stuck. And it would stick with her again hours later when she stepped into a community Q&A in the basement of a small church in Hyattsville. No cameras, no press, just folding chairs and curious faces. One girl no older than 16 raised her hand, voice tentative. "How do you know when it's the right time to speak up?" The room hushed. Jasmine looked at her, really looked at her. She saw herself not just in the girl's face, but in her posture, braced, unsure. "You don't always know," she said, "but if someone's trying to define you with a lie, and you've got the truth, that's your time." The girl nodded slowly like she was writing it on more than just paper. And in that moment, all the tweets and TV panels faded. This was what mattered. This was who she'd done it for. Not to embarrass a man like Patel, but to draw a line for every person who's ever sat in a room where their silence was assumed. That night, she walked home alone. No staff, no handlers, just her heels clicking softly on the sidewalk, replaying everything. Not the headlines, not the clip, just one sentence. Sometimes correcting the record is winning. And somewhere deep in Capitol Hill, behind a desk bigger than her apartment, Kash Patel sat in a quiet office watching the same clip for the 20th time. No grin, no press tour. Just the cold realization that he had stepped into a room with a woman who didn't need volume to win. She had brought proof, and now she had the floor. And she wasn't done with it. Because what Kash Patel hadn't realized, what many in that committee room still failed to grasp, was that this wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a beginning, a shift, a redirection of power in a place where silence had long been the safest strategy. But Jasmine Crockett had rewritten the script. And now, the question in every hallway conversation, every late-night call, and every political newsletter wasn't, "Did you see the clip?" It was, "What is she going to do next?" The answer came faster than anyone expected. 3 days after the hearing, while media buzz still echoed across networks, Jasmine published a short article on her official website. No flashy header, no campaign-style graphics, just a headline. "When the work speaks, let it speak loudly." The piece was clear and unflinching. She walked readers through the hearing, through Patel's accusation, through her decision to remain calm, to hold the line, to present proof rather than posture. But it wasn't defensive, it wasn't personal. It was procedural, strategic, deliberate. The tone was unmistakable. "I belong here. And I'm not just holding my seat, I'm using it." Within hours, Hill staffers were circulating it via back-channel group chats. Reporters quoted it in Sunday columns. Even longtime skeptics found themselves admitting, if only quietly, that Crockett had flipped a narrative most believed was out of her reach. But that shift, the public support, the private reevaluations, triggered something else too. Resistance. More covert this time. Less about Patel, more about her. Suddenly, committee schedules were tight. Invitations to joint working sessions were delayed. Her memos were scrutinized more heavily, twice as many questions from committee clerks, new layers of bureaucratic friction that hadn't existed the week before. It wasn't a shutdown. It was a squeeze. The system, sensing a disruption, was trying to pressurize her back into place. Tanya noticed it first. "You're too visible now," she said one morning, pacing as she flipped through a revised calendar. "They can't ignore you, so they're going to try to exhaust you." Jasmine nodded, unsurprised. "That's fine. They don't know how long I've trained for exhaustion," but Marcus was less optimistic. "You've got support," he said, "but it's soft, conditional. They'll back you while it's safe. But the second it gets uncomfortable, they'll scatter." Jasmine finished for him. She wasn't bitter, just honest. And because she knew this next phase would be quieter, more subtle, she made a choice to go directly to the people, not through press releases or sound bites, but through presence. The following week, she launched a listening tour, not a campaign stunt, not a ribbon-cutting run, but a tightly planned, deeply intentional series of community sessions across key districts. Church basements, public libraries, high school auditoriums. No press coverage, no slogans. Just her, a mic, and open time for anyone to speak. And people came. Mothers with questions about data privacy. Veterans worried about surveillance overreach. Students, especially young women, who'd seen the clip and wanted to ask about courage, about timing, about staying calm when everything in you wants to fight fire with fire. In Akron, Ohio, a public civics teacher played the video for her class, then surprised them with a Zoom Q&A with Jasmine. One girl, Amira, raised her hand mid-call. "You didn't yell," she said. "You didn't storm out. You just stayed." How Jasmine smiled gently. "Because yelling makes it about the volume, and I wanted to make it about the proof." The students clapped not performatively, but because they recognized something, someone who didn't flinch. And in D.C., word of the tour reached far beyond her base. Some in her own party were confused. "You've already won the moment," one strategist told her. "Why go low profile now?" She shook her head. "Because viral doesn't equal change. Attention isn't accountability. I'm not here to trend. I'm here to legislate. But beneath that resolve, pressure built. She knew Patel's allies were regrouping, that a smear campaign was being quietly assembled, not against her qualifications this time, but her methods, her motives, her temperament. A new narrative was forming. She's ambitious, calculated, opportunistic. Jasmine saw it coming like storm clouds gathering, and once again, she didn't run from it. She prepared. In one of her final stops on the listening tour, she stood before a crowd of over 200 in a community center in Baltimore. A man near the back raised his hand and asked the question everyone had been circling around. How do you keep going when the system clearly wasn't built for you? Jasmine paused. She looked out at the crowd, old faces, young ones, those who'd believed in her from day one, and those who'd only just started listening. Then she answered, you keep going because the system wasn't built for truth either, and that's why it needs people who are willing to bring it, hold it, speak it, no matter how heavy it gets. The room was still. Not dramatic, not emotional, just still. Because they felt the weight of it, the honesty, the exhaustion, and the resolve. Later that night, she returned to her apartment, her inbox once again, full some praise, some warnings, some invitations she suspected were more about keeping her close than lifting her up. She ignored them all. Instead, she opened her laptop and began drafting her next proposal, centered around digital evidence and classified oversight hearings. A policy born not out of theory, but out of lived experience. She worked past midnight, the city humming outside, the headlines fading, but her focus sharper than ever. The floor was still hers. And this time, she was building something permanent on it. And what she was building now, this policy, this platform, this precedent, wasn't just a rebuttal to Kash Patel's insult. It was a blueprint, a new foundation for how truth could operate inside a system that too often favored noise over nuance. The floor was still hers. And now, she was anchoring it in something unshakable. It was just past 1 a.m. when Jasmine finally stepped away from her laptop. The policy draft was nearly complete, tight language, watertight review mechanisms, and a framework for preserving audio evidence in oversight proceedings that could no longer be ignored or erased. She didn't need to imagine how it would be received. She already knew. Some would scoff. Bureaucrats would claim it was overreach. Others would quietly acknowledge its brilliance while simultaneously doing everything in their power to bury it. And a few, mostly the ones who'd built their power on plausible deniability, would panic. Because this wasn't just a document, it was a mirror. And Jasmine had learned something. In the last few weeks, power doesn't fear confrontation. It fears clarity. By mid-morning, the first internal committee reviews had been submitted. Tanya scanned through the notes, lips pursed. You've got soft pushback from oversight, she said. But the intelligence subcommittee liaison just asked for a meeting. Jasmine arched an eyebrow. Really? Didn't even wait for the bill to be finalized, Tanya said. They know it's coming. Good, Jasmine thought. Let them. By noon, she was back in the Capitol, another hearing, this one more routine procedural. But when she walked in, the energy shifted again. The kind of shift that didn't make a sound but changed the posture of the room. The way eyes glanced sideways, the way aides leaned in closer to whisper. The story hadn't faded. It had rooted. During a recess, Repius Ron Thomas Wynne approached her again. The same Wynne who weeks earlier had barely spoken a sentence to her in 3 years. He carried a printed copy of her proposal. You know, he said, voice low, this could get legs. Jasmine smiled dry. That why you're carrying it like it might explode? He chuckled. No, that's just habit. I've seen good ideas die on paper when they don't get protected early. Then let's protect it, she said. And just like that, Wynne signed on as co-sponsor, a ripple small and sharp, and it was only the beginning. Over the next 5 days, Jasmine moved methodically. Private meetings, policy huddles, short briefings with allies in the digital privacy space. The proposal began to circulate not through traditional PR, but through quiet endorsements from people who mattered. Former intelligence analysts, veteran committee staffers, even one Republican staffer who slipped her a note after a late-night markup session. This policy makes too much sense not to happen. Just don't let them twist it. She wouldn't, because Jasmine had already learned you can survive spin when you control the receipts. Still, the resistance sharpened. Patel himself, while no longer publicly lashing out, had retreated into strategic silence. But his network hadn't. New articles surfaced framing Jasmine as obsessed with retribution. Anonymous op-eds questioned her tone. One conservative blog called her the woman with the USB and a grudge. It didn't bother her, because she didn't have a grudge. She had the facts. And if Washington didn't respect quiet strength, she was going to make them accountable to it. On a crisp Friday morning, Jasmine walked alone to her favorite corner coffee shop, just 5 blocks from the Capitol, small enough to avoid press, quiet enough to hear herself think. She sat at the back booth, chamomile tea in hand, and reviewed a final draft of her op-ed for The Atlantic. The headline, "We are done, asking permission to be qualified. It was direct, not angry, but unflinching. In it, she laid out the full timeline from Patel's original slight to the USB moment to the waves of spin that followed. She drew a clean, bright line between weaponized perception and documentable truth, and she closed it with this: let the system be uncomfortable. Let them wrestle with the fact that preparation, patience, and poise can be more powerful than any microphone. Because if your voice only matters when it's loud, it was never yours to begin with. She hit send. The op-ed went live at 9:00 a.m. By noon, it had gone viral, not in the clickbait way. In the "you just articulated what we've all been feeling" way. Teachers printed it for classrooms, lawyers cited it in discussion panels, journalists referenced it during interviews about oversight reform. But Jasmine She was already on to the next task. That afternoon, she sat with her team on the 7th floor of the Hart Building, finalizing her testimony for an upcoming tech transparency forum. This time, she wouldn't be testifying, she'd be leading. That distinction mattered, because what had begun with a single sentence, "she's unfit to serve," had become a moment of national reevaluation. Not just about her, about the rooms she walked into, about the system itself. And in those rooms, people were listening differently now, even the ones who didn't like her, especially them. Weeks later, when her policy passed the first subcommittee hurdle unanimously, Jasmine didn't celebrate. She nodded once calmly, then got back to work. Because this story, the one everyone had tried to flatten into a viral moment, had always been bigger than that. It was about redefining power, not as volume, not as vengeance, as truth delivered clearly, patiently, and without apology. And as she stepped out of that final hearing room, the sun just beginning to dip across the Washington skyline, a young staffer passed her in the hall and stopped. "Hey, Representative Crockett," he said. "I just wanted to say, that thing with the recording, the way you handled it. That's why I applied to work here." Jasmine smiled. Real, small, sincere. "Then let's make sure this place deserves you," she said. He nodded and walked on. And Jasmine? She kept walking too. Because truth may shake the room once, but when you build with it, it becomes the floor no one can pull out from under you. And she wasn't just standing on that floor anymore. She was expanding it for everyone who came next.